Hey guys, in this video I'm going to add some much needed tool storage to the shop by building a tool wall. Stay tuned and I'll show you how I did it. I wanted a place to keep my measuring and marking tools that would be within easy reach of my workbench, since that's where I would be using them the most. I also wanted to make sure they were easy to get at and to put away, because if it's not easy, then I'm not going to put them away and they're just going to end up scattered throughout the shop. Now, luckily for me, I had some leftover pre-finished plywood panels from my last shop cabinet build that were going to be big enough to use in this project. Now, I could rip the 3/4 inch to 30 inches high on the table saw, but I wanted it to be 48 inches wide, so in order to make that cut, I was going to have to get out my track saw. Now, the 1/2 inch ply needed to match the height of 30 inches, but it was only going to be 24 inches wide, so I could cut that no problem at the table saw. I wanted to trim out my tool wall with hardwood, and I had some 8/4 walnut that was big enough for me to cut out all the trim parts for the whole project, which will give me a consistent look. After using the joiner to flatten one face of the rough walnut and then squaring up one edge, I took it over to the planer to get the other face flat. I then took my mill board to the table saw where I could rip out square blanks that I would cut everything I needed out of. I was able to get 3 blanks out of that one board. I then rotated each blank 90 degrees because I wanted to cut each blank in half, but make sure that the straight edge grain was showing on the actual edges and not the cut up face grain. This will give the edges of my trim a clean and uniform straight grain look, which you'll see in a few minutes when I install the trim. Next, I went back to the planer to make sure every trim piece was the exact same 3/4 inch thickness, since I kind of eyeballed it at the table saw when I ripped those blanks. The next step was to cut a rabbet along one edge of each trim piece that was 1/4 inch deep and 3/4 inches wide. This would allow the trim piece to wrap around the edge of the plywood, creating a clean look because the edges of the plywood would actually be hidden. I then cut 45-degree miters on the trim pieces at the miter saw. Now, once I had everything cut to length, I could apply glue and use brad nails to hold everything in place as I wrapped the trim around the 3/4 inch ply. And after each install, I did a little cleanup of glue squeeze out. As I carefully wrapped around the panel, I made sure all my miters were tight before nailing the next piece in place. Once I finished, I gave a quick inspection of the miters and also checked for leftover squeeze out before moving on to the sliding door panel. For the trim on the door panel, I went with more of a C-channel cut that wrapped around both sides of the ply. I did this mainly because the door is going to be sliding back and forth across the main tool wall, and so it might take a little bit of abuse on the backside as well as the front, so I wanted to make sure I protected against that. So once I had everything in place, I could leave all that to dry and focus on organizing my tool layout. I ripped some of the remaining walnut into 3/4 inch strips and then figured out how long each needed to be for each of my squares. Once I had them to the right lengths at the miter saw, I cut a 1/4 inch groove down the center that would fit my square's design. I countersunk 2 holes in each and screwed them into place on the board. I continued this process with each successive square using 3/4 inch offcuts as spacers to make sure that everything had an evenly spaced look. For my triangles, I traced out the negative space with a pencil and chopped it at the miter saw. I then headed to the bandsaw where I cut the triangles out. To clean up the edges, I went to the disc sander and sanded to my lines. I then used spacers again to get the spacing right and screwed them into place. Now, once I figured out where everything was going to go on the tool wall, I took all the tools off and took it over and screwed it in place in its new home on the wall. I love this thing. I think it turned out better than I imagined it in my head. Having things organized is nice, but having them beautifully organized is a whole new level of happiness. Now, to tackle the sliding door, I first needed to install the hardware. I added some thin walnut strips to make the hardware sit even with the frame and screwed everything into place. I then installed the track on what was essentially a long maple 2x4, making sure that it was the right distance from the tool wall. After getting everything anchored down, I wanted to add some flair to this door by adding an acrylic logo sign that was made for me by Trevor at Maker Experiment on Instagram. He does amazing work in acrylic and nailed my logo perfectly. I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to check out more of his work or inquire about getting a sign of your own. So once the sign was mounted with double-sided tape, I could slide the door onto the track and install the bumper stop on the end of the rail. Now, after giving it a quick test, I could see that it glided perfectly on the track, and one day I'll have tools hanging on this door as well. I gave myself plenty of room to add new tools as I get them. Now, I have to say again, I love the way that this turned out. All my measuring and marking tools can now go in one place and are within easy reach of where I'll use them the most. I'll go ahead and leave a link in the description below for the sliding track hardware that I used in case you want to use it on your own tool wall. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, why don't you hit that like button and leave a comment below. And if you'd like to see more videos like this in the future, why don't you hit that logo and subscribe to my channel? I would love to have you on board. Also, check out these other videos I have lined up for more projects. And until next time, have fun in the shop.